My parents skipped my wedding because their dog was sick, so I gave them the same ridiculous reason at every event. My parents got a Labradoodle named Muffin 3 years ago, and that dog became their entire world. They bought it a custom bed that cost more than my first car. Set up an Instagram account for it with professional photos every week. Canceled plans with me if Muffin seemed tired. When I announced my engagement to Tom, they spent 5 minutes congratulating me, then 30 minutes telling me how Muffin had learned a new trick. I should have known then what was coming. I'd been with Tom for 5 years and my parents met him maybe 6 times because they couldn't leave Muffin alone that long. They said she had separation anxiety, but really they had separation anxiety from her. They missed my college graduation because Muffin had an upset stomach. Skipped my promotion dinner because Muffin didn't like the new dog sitter. Left my birthday party early because they saw Muffin looking sad on the pet camera. But they promised the wedding would be different. This was their only daughter getting married. Of course they'd be there. We planned the wedding for 14 months out. My parents helped pick the venue, tasted the cake, even gave opinions on flowers. Mom cried when we found my dress, saying she'd dreamed of this moment. Dad practiced his father-daughter dance with me in their living room while Muffin watched from her velvet dog bed. They invited 40 of their friends and insisted on paying for the open bar so everyone could celebrate properly. A week before the wedding, Mom called to confirm what time they needed to arrive for photos. She was excited about her dress and kept asking if peacock blue would look good next to my bridesmaids' colors. Dad texted asking if his speech was too long at 5 minutes. Everything was perfect. The morning of my wedding, I woke up to 12 missed calls from Mom. My heart dropped thinking someone had died. I called back and she was sobbing so hard I couldn't understand her. Dad took the phone and said Muffin wasn't eating her breakfast. She'd thrown up once during the night, nothing serious, but now she wouldn't eat her special organic food. They were at the emergency vet. I asked if Muffin was dying and Dad said no. The vet said she probably just ate something weird on their walk. But she seemed lethargic. I said okay. They could come straight from the vet to the venue. We had 3 hours before the ceremony. Mom got back on the phone and said they couldn't leave Muffin alone when she was sick. I reminded them about the wedding. My wedding. Today. Mom said she understood, but Muffin needed them, and they'd try to make the reception if Muffin felt better. I stood there in my wedding suite, hair half done, trying to process that my parents were choosing their dog over my wedding. My makeup artist asked if everything was okay, and I just started crying. Tom's parents were horrified. His mom offered to walk me down the aisle. My bridesmaids kept checking their phones thinking surely my parents would show up. They didn't. I walked down the aisle with Tom's dad while the seats reserved for my parents sat empty. Everyone noticed. My parents' 40 friends whispered among themselves. My aunt kept texting them increasingly angry messages. During the ceremony, I could see people in the crowd checking their phones, probably trying to reach my parents too. The reception started and still no parents. Their friends started leaving early, embarrassed and confused. My dad's brother gave an impromptu speech to fill the gap where my father's speech should have been. The father-daughter dance song played while I danced with Tom instead. The photographer kept asking where my parents were for the family photos. I had to tell him they weren't coming. By the time we cut the cake, I'd stopped checking my phone. My parents sent one text with a photo of Muffin at the vet, saying she was feeling better and they'd celebrate with me later. They didn't even apologize. Later never came. They called the next week asking how the wedding went, like they'd missed it due to an act of God instead of a dog with an upset stomach. When I told them how hurt I was, Mom said I was being insensitive to Muffin's medical emergency. Dad said they thought I'd understand that Muffin was like their child too. The dog was like their child. And they chose her over their actual child's wedding. That's when I started my new policy. I didn't cut them off completely. I just treated them exactly how they'd treated me. 3 days after I told my parents how hurt I was, my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. The message said they were having a birthday dinner for her next Thursday at that Italian place they love downtown and wanted to know if Tom and I could make it. I sat on the couch staring at those words for probably 20 minutes. My thumb hovered over the keyboard while I thought about everything they'd put me through. Finally, I typed out my response saying we couldn't come because Tom hadn't been feeling great lately, and I needed to stay home with him to make sure he was okay. I hit send before I could change my mind. My phone rang less than a minute later. Mom's voice came through, sounding worried and asking what was wrong with Tom and whether they should bring soup over to our apartment. I kept my tone light and casual like this was no big deal. I told her it wasn't anything serious, just that he'd been really tired lately and needed rest. I said we'd celebrate her birthday another time when he felt better. She asked if he'd been to the doctor, and I said we were watching it for now. The whole conversation lasted maybe 5 minutes before I made an excuse to get off the phone. The following week, Dad sent a text asking if Tom and I wanted to come over for Sunday dinner. Before the wedding, we used to do that monthly, and Mom would make pot roast or chicken. I looked at the message and set my phone down on the kitchen counter. 2 hours passed before I picked it back up and responded. I wrote that we couldn't make it, because Tom was having one of those days where he just needed quiet and rest. I added that maybe we could try again next month when he was feeling more up to it. Dad called within 10 minutes. I could hear confusion in his voice when he said they could do dinner earlier in the day if that helped, or even just meet for coffee somewhere close to our apartment. I stuck to what I'd said about Tom needing to take it easy and not push himself. Dad said okay, and that they'd try again next month. His voice sounded uncertain, like he was trying to figure out what was going on, but couldn't quite put it together yet. He mentioned something about hoping Tom felt better soon before we hung up. 2 weeks went by and my parents sent another invitation. This time it was for a barbecue at their house for some of Dad's coworkers. I texted back that we had to skip it because Tom had been dealing with some stomach issues and didn't feel comfortable being social right now. I wrote that I wanted to stay home and make sure he was all right. I added a little bit about how these things can be unpredictable and it's better to be safe. Mom responded pretty quickly with a long message full of concern. She suggested 3 different doctors Tom should see and asked if he'd tried certain medications or changed his diet. She wanted to know if it was stress-related or if maybe he had food allergies. I thanked her for all the suggestions and said we were keeping an eye on everything. I kept my tone friendly but not warm, exactly the way she'd sounded on my wedding day when she explained why Muffin's upset stomach meant more than being there for me. Tom came home from work that evening and found me sitting on the couch staring at my phone again. He set his briefcase down and asked what was wrong. I explained my whole strategy about using his health as an excuse the same way they'd used Muffin's health for 3 years. I told him about declining Mom's birthday dinner and Dad's Sunday invitation and the barbecue. He got quiet for a long moment and sat down next to me. Then he said he supported what I was doing, but wanted to make sure I was okay emotionally. I told him I was fine and this felt like the right way to handle things. 3 weeks into my new policy, Katie called. She's my aunt on Dad's side and we'd always been close. She asked if I was coming to her anniversary party the following month. I said of course I'd be there and asked what she needed me to bring. She mentioned she'd invited my parents too, but they acted strange when she brought up whether I was coming. She said Mom had gotten really quiet and Dad had changed the subject fast. Katie asked if everything was all right between us, and I said it was complicated, but we were working through some stuff. The night of Katie's party arrived and Tom and I got there early to help set up. We hung decorations and arranged chairs in her backyard, while other family members started showing up. My parents walked in about 30 minutes after we did. I watched Mom's face when she spotted us across the yard. Her eyes went wide and she grabbed Dad's arm. They both stared at Tom like they were seeing a ghost. Mom walked over to where I was standing by the drinks table. She asked why we couldn't come to any of their events if Tom was healthy enough to be here. I gave her my sweetest smile and said he was having a really good day today, and we were taking advantage of it while we could. Dad pulled Tom aside near the fence about an hour into the party. I pretended to talk to my cousin but kept watching them from the corner of my eye. Dad was asking Tom something and gesturing with his hands. Tom's face stayed calm and friendly. I saw him shrug and say something back. Later, Tom told me Dad had asked point blank if he'd been sick. Tom said he told Dad he'd been feeling fine and maybe there was some confusion about things. I watched my father's expression change as he processed that answer. Confusion shifted into something that looked like suspicion. His eyes found me across the yard and held my gaze for a few seconds. But he didn't walk over. He didn't confront me directly. He just turned back to his conversation with Tom, looking like someone had just told him a joke he didn't quite understand yet. The next morning, my phone rang while I was making coffee. Mom's name flashed on the screen and my stomach twisted. I let it ring 3 times before answering. She didn't even say hello, just launched straight into asking if I'd been lying about Tom being sick this whole time. Her voice had that sharp edge she used when she was trying not to yell. I leaned against the kitchen counter and kept my voice calm. I explained that I'd been doing exactly what they did to me, using the same types of excuses they'd used for 3 years, prioritizing someone I loved over family events. The phone went completely quiet on her end. Not even breathing sounds. Just dead silence that stretched so long I checked to see if the call had dropped. Then Mom started talking again, her words coming out fast and jumbled. She said it was completely different because Muffin was actually sick. I felt something cold settle in my chest. I pointed out that Muffin had an upset stomach, not a life-threatening emergency. The vet said she probably ate something weird on a walk, but they still chose her over their only daughter's wedding, over walking me down the aisle, over the father-daughter dance, over being in any of my wedding photos. Mom's voice got high and tight. She said I was twisting everything around. I asked how I was twisting it when I was just stating facts about what happened. She hung up on me. The call ended with a sharp click, and I stood there holding my phone, feeling this weird mix of cold satisfaction and hollow ache spreading through my chest. I went to work but couldn't focus on anything. Around 2 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Dad. He said I was being immature and punishing them for caring about their dog, that they were just being responsible pet owners. I stared at the message for a full minute before responding. I typed that I wasn't punishing anyone, just prioritizing my husband's comfort the same way they prioritized Muffin's. I asked if he thought that was reasonable since Tom was like their child too, using his exact words back at him, the words he'd said on my wedding day. I added that surely he understood putting your child's needs first. He didn't respond. That night I came home and went straight to the bathroom. Tom was in the living room watching something on TV. I closed the bathroom door and sat on the floor with my back against the tub. Everything from the past few weeks crashed over me at once. My parents missing my wedding, the empty seats, dancing with Tom instead of my dad, all the excuses I'd been making, Mom's voice on the phone saying it was different, Dad calling me immature. I started crying, these ugly sobs that made my whole body shake. Tom must have heard because the bathroom door opened and he came in. He didn't say anything, just sat down on the floor next to me and pulled me against his chest. I sobbed into his shirt about how much it hurt that they still didn't understand what they did wrong, how they kept acting like I was the problem. He held me and rubbed my back until I could breathe normally again. Then he said maybe we should talk to someone together about healthy ways to process this. A therapist or counselor, someone who could help us work through it. I wiped my face on my sleeve and told him I'd think about it. 2 weeks passed. I ignored 3 calls from my parents and several texts asking if we could talk. Then an invitation came through for Thanksgiving at their house. The message said they were doing the usual dinner with the whole family. Turkey and stuffing and all the traditional sides. They hoped we could make it. I looked at the text for a long time. Tom was sitting next to me on the couch. I opened my phone and started typing. Said we couldn't make it because Tom had been feeling anxious about large gatherings lately. I didn't want to push him when he wasn't comfortable. Then I went to Muffin's Instagram account and screenshot one of her recent photos. Added it to my message like a little reminder, like saying I learned from the best. Tom watched me send it and shook his head but didn't try to stop me. Katie called me the next day. I was at the grocery store pushing a cart down the cereal aisle when my phone rang. She said she'd heard about Thanksgiving. Said half the family was talking about how weird my parents were being about their dog. How I was clearly making a point with all my excuses about Tom. Her voice was warm and supportive. She said she was on my side and thought my parents needed this wake-up call. That maybe it would help them understand how they'd been acting. I thanked her and felt this wave of validation. But there was also this small voice in my head asking if I was taking things too far. If I was becoming just as bad as they were. I pushed the thought away and told Katie I appreciated her support. Tom came home from a work function a few days later and mentioned that Donald had pulled him aside. My uncle had asked questions about what happened at our wedding. Why my parents weren't there? Tom said he'd explained the situation honestly. Told Donald about Muffin being sick and my parents staying at the vet instead of coming to the ceremony. About how they'd been canceling plans for years because of the dog. Donald had listened carefully, and then said he understood why I was upset. Tom said the conversation felt awkward, but necessary. He figured word would spread through the extended family now. People would start understanding what really happened and why things were tense between me and my parents. The word did spread. Fast. A week later, I got a call from my cousin telling me that Gregory had confronted my parents at a family gathering. Dad's brother had asked directly why they missed my wedding. My parents tried to explain about Muffin being sick and needing to stay with her. Gregory apparently laughed. Actually laughed right in their faces. He said their daughter was giving them a taste of their own medicine and they deserved it. My parents got furious. They grabbed their coats and left the gathering early, barely saying goodbye to anyone. My cousin said the whole room went quiet after they stormed out. 3 days later, a long email appeared in my inbox from Mom. I was at work when I saw it pop up. Didn't open it until I got home that evening. The email went on for paragraphs about how I was turning the family against them, making them look like bad parents when they were just being responsible pet owners. She said Muffin depended on them and they couldn't just abandon her when she was sick. That I was being cruel and manipulative by telling everyone their business. That family problems should stay private. I read it twice and then closed my laptop. Didn't respond. For 3 whole days, I left that email sitting in my inbox with no reply. On the 3rd day, I finally wrote back. 1 sentence. Said I was sure they'd understand if I prioritized Tom's needs over family events, just like they taught me. Sent it and closed my laptop again. Christmas invitations started arriving in early December. My parents sent a formal one, the kind you'd send to distant relatives. Heavy cardstock with fancy lettering. It emphasized that the whole family would be there for Christmas Eve dinner, that it was important we attend, that it wouldn't be the same without us. I held the invitation in my hands and felt nothing. Just this flat, empty feeling. I texted back that we were planning a quiet Christmas at home. Said Tom found the holidays stressful with all the noise and people, that we'd celebrate with them another time when things were calmer. Added that we hoped they had a nice Christmas with everyone else. Mom responded immediately asking what time we'd be there. I read her text 3 times before realizing she hadn't actually read my message. Or she had and was just ignoring it. I typed back more clearly. Said we would not be attending. We were staying home. Just the 2 of us. She sent back a string of question marks. Called asking if they'd changed their minds. I stayed quiet on the line listening to Dad breathe. He said my name twice before I told him we weren't coming. He asked why I was doing this and I said I learned from the best. Then hung up before he could respond. Tom found me sitting on the couch staring at my phone. He sat down next to me and put his hand on my knee. Asked if I felt better now that I'd stood my ground. I looked at him and realized I didn't feel better at all. The anger that had been burning in my chest for months felt cold and heavy instead. I felt tired more than anything else. Sad in a way that scared me because anger at least had energy, but this emptiness just sat there taking up space. Tom pulled me close and I rested my head on his shoulder. We sat like that for a long time without talking. Christmas morning came and we opened presents, just the two of us. Tom made pancakes and we watched movies all day. My phone stayed silent except for one text from Katie asking how we were doing. I told her we were fine and she sent back a heart emoji. The day felt strange and quiet. Not peaceful exactly, but not awful either. Just different from every other Christmas I'd ever had. Michaela showed up at our apartment 3 days after Christmas with cookies and a concerned look on her face. Tom let her in and she gave me a hug that lasted longer than normal. We sat in the living room and she asked how the holidays went. I gave her the short version about staying home and my parents calling. She nodded and ate a cookie. Then she set down her plate and looked at me directly. Said she wanted to talk about something that might be hard to hear. I told her to go ahead. She took a breath and said it seemed like I was obsessed with making my parents hurt the way they hurt me. That every conversation we had lately circled back to what excuse I'd used or how they'd reacted. She asked if this was actually helping me heal, or just keeping me stuck in the pain. I felt my face get hot and told her she didn't understand what it was like. She said I was right. She didn't, but she could see what it was doing to me from the outside. That I seemed angry all the time now instead of just hurt. I stood up and walked to the kitchen to get water. Told her I appreciated her concern, but I was handling things my own way. She followed me and said that was exactly what worried her. That my way seemed to be building my whole life around revenge instead of moving forward. I drank the water and didn't look at her. She hugged me again and said she loved me and she'd be there whenever I needed to talk. After she left, I sat on the kitchen floor. Her words kept playing in my head even though I didn't want them to. Tom came in and sat down next to me. Asked if I wanted to talk about it. I shook my head, but he stayed there anyway. We sat on the floor together until my legs went numb. I made the appointment with Beth on a Tuesday morning. Found her through my insurance website and picked her because her profile said she worked with family conflict. The receptionist asked what I wanted to discuss, and I said relationship issues with my parents. She booked me for the following week. I didn't tell my parents I was going to therapy. Didn't tell anyone except Tom. The waiting room had boring art on the walls and magazines nobody wanted to read. Beth came out exactly on time. She was probably 50 with gray hair and glasses. Her office had a couch and chairs and a box of tissues on every surface. She asked me to tell her what brought me in. I started with the wedding and then went back to explain about Muffin and the 3 years of cancellations. Told her about my policy of using Tom as an excuse the same way they used their dog. She listened without interrupting and took a few notes. When I finished, she was quiet for a minute. Then she asked what I was hoping to achieve with my current approach. I said I wanted them to understand how it felt. She nodded and asked if they seemed to understand yet. I admitted they were starting to, but it hadn't changed anything. She asked what I actually wanted from them beyond understanding. Whether I wanted an apology or changed behavior, or just to hurt them back. I opened my mouth to answer and realized I didn't know. She asked if my current approach was bringing me closer to what I wanted or just keeping me in the same painful place. I stared at the tissues on her desk and felt my throat get tight. Told her I didn't know that either. She said that was okay, and we'd work on figuring it out together. The session ended and I scheduled another appointment for the next week. Walked to my car feeling shaky and confused. Called Tom on the drive home and told him the therapist asked good questions I didn't have answers for. He said that sounded like a good therapist then. Beth and I met every week. She asked a lot of questions about my childhood and my relationship with my parents before Muffin. I told her about how close we used to be. How Mom and I would go shopping every Saturday. How Dad taught me to ride a bike and came to every school play. She asked when things started changing, and I realized it happened gradually after they got the dog. First, it was little things like cutting our shopping trips short. Then bigger things like missing my graduation. She asked if I'd told them how the pattern made me feel before the wedding. I said I'd mentioned it a few times, but they always had explanations. Always made it sound reasonable. Beth pointed out that I'd been feeling less important than a dog for 3 years, and the wedding wasn't really about one day. It was about 3 years of proof that I'd never be their priority again. I started crying right there in her office, grabbed tissues from the box and couldn't stop. She waited until I calmed down, asked if I'd ever said that out loud before. I shook my head. She asked if I even wanted a relationship with them anymore given how much they'd hurt me. I cried harder because saying I didn't want my parents in my life felt like the worst thing a daughter could say. But sitting there in that office, I admitted I didn't know if I did. The idea of having them in my life meant more disappointment and hurt. The idea of not having them meant being the daughter who cut off her parents over a dog. Both options felt terrible. Beth said we'd keep working on it, that I didn't have to decide anything right away. I left that session feeling emptied out, like I'd cried out something that had been sitting in my chest for years. 2 months into therapy, my parents sent another invitation, this time for a small dinner at their house. Just the four of us. The text said they wanted to talk. Really talk this time. I stared at the message for a while. Thought about what Beth would say about it. Typed back that Tom and I couldn't make it. Said he'd been having trouble sleeping lately and evening commitments made it worse. That I was trying to help him maintain a good routine. Hit send and set down my phone. Mom responded within minutes asking what was wrong with Tom's sleep. I didn't answer right away. Went to therapy that week and told Beth about the invitation. She asked why I'd said no. I explained about my policy of using the same excuses they used. She asked if I actually wanted to have that conversation with them or if I was avoiding it. I said I didn't know what good talking would do when they still didn't really get it. She pointed out that I was assuming they hadn't changed without giving them a chance to show me. Asked if I was protecting myself or punishing them. I said maybe both. She said that was honest and we should explore that more. Left her office with more questions than answers like always. Mom texted again a few days later. Asked how long I was going to keep this up. I read the message 3 times. Felt that familiar anger rise up in my chest. Typed back asking how long they kept choosing Muffin over me before I finally got married without them there. Added that I'd lost count somewhere around 3 years. Hit send and waited. She didn't reply. I sat there staring at my phone expecting the dots to appear showing she was typing. Nothing came. Hours passed and still nothing. I felt vindicated and exhausted at the same time. Told Tom about it when he got home. He read the messages and looked at me with this sad expression. Said they were clearly trying even if they weren't doing it perfectly. I said trying meant actually showing up and changing behavior, not just sending invitations and getting upset when I said no. He nodded but didn't look convinced. We ordered takeout and ate in front of the TV. I kept checking my phone but Mom never responded. That silence felt heavier than any argument would have. Valentine's Day came and a delivery person knocked on our apartment door. Tom answered and came back carrying a huge gift basket. Expensive chocolate and wine and fancy crackers. A card tucked in the front. I opened it and saw my parents' handwriting. The message said they loved me and missed me. Hoped we could find a way back to each other. I showed Tom and he said they were trying to reach out. I looked at the basket and felt nothing. Pointed out that they didn't actually apologize in the card. Didn't acknowledge what they did or why I was upset. Just threw money at the problem like always. Expensive gifts instead of actual accountability. Tom said maybe they didn't know how to apologize properly. I said they were adults and figuring out how to say sorry wasn't that complicated. Put the basket on the counter and walked away. Later that night, I ate some of the chocolate because it was good chocolate and wasting it seemed stupid. But I didn't call to thank them. Didn't send a text. Let the gesture sit there acknowledged but not rewarded. Priscilla called in March with big news. She was engaged. Her boyfriend had proposed on a beach vacation and she was over the moon. I congratulated her and she asked if I'd be a bridesmaid. Said of course I would. We talked about dates and venues and color schemes. Then her voice got quieter. She said she needed to ask me something awkward. Wanted to know if my situation with our parents were going to be weird at her wedding. If they'd actually show up, or if there'd be drama. I felt my stomach drop. Told her they'd definitely be there because Muffin wasn't their daughter. The words came out bitter and sharp. Priscilla went quiet on the other end. Said she didn't mean to make me feel bad. I apologized for snapping. Assured her that whatever was happening between me and my parents wouldn't affect her day. That they'd show up for her wedding because they actually cared about her events. She said that wasn't fair and she knew they loved me. I said sure they did, but love and priorities were different things. We changed the subject after that, but the conversation left me feeling bitter and small. Priscilla's engagement party happened in April at a restaurant downtown. I wore a nice dress and showed up with Tom. My parents were already there when we arrived. Mom saw me and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Dad raised his hand in a small wave. I nodded back and steered Tom toward the other side of the room. We talked to cousins and Priscilla's friends. Made small talk about the wedding plans. My parents stayed on their side and we stayed on ours. When we had to interact for photos or toasts, we were polite. Spoke in pleasant voices about nothing important. How was work? How was the apartment? Surface-level questions with surface-level answers. Katie watched us from across the room. She came over later while I was getting a drink. Said it hurt to see our family fractured like this. That she understood why I was protecting myself, but it was still painful to watch. I told her I didn't know how else to handle it. She squeezed my arm and said she knew. That she wasn't judging me. Just grieving what our family used to be. I nodded because I was grieving that too. Had been for longer than she realized. My next therapy session with Beth happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I sat in her office and told her about the engagement party, about the polite distance between me and my parents, about how Katie said she was grieving our fractured family. Beth listened and then asked me something that made me stop talking. She wanted to know what real accountability would look like from my parents. What would they actually need to do or say for me to feel heard? I opened my mouth to answer and realized I didn't know. I'd been so focused on making them feel what I felt that I hadn't actually figured out what I needed from them. Beth waited while I sat there trying to find words. I told her I wanted them to understand they hurt me, but she pushed back gently. Did I want an apology? Or did I want them to change their behavior? Did I want them to acknowledge the wedding? Or did I want them to acknowledge 3 years of choosing a dog over their daughter? I felt something uncomfortable twist in my stomach, because I realized I'd never actually told them what I needed to move forward. I'd just been punishing them and hoping they'd figure it out. Beth said that wasn't really fair to anyone, including me. I left that session feeling worse than when I arrived. Spring came and the trees outside our apartment started blooming. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad, then another from Mom, then 3 more from Dad. I read them and felt my hands start shaking. They were angry texts, really angry, saying I was being cruel and manipulative by keeping them away from Tom, that I was using their son-in-law as a weapon against them. Dad's last message said I was no better than they were if I was going to hold grudges forever. I stared at that text until the words blurred. He was comparing me to them, saying I was just as bad as parents who missed their daughter's wedding for a dog with an upset stomach. I threw my phone across the room and it hit the wall. Tom picked it up and read the messages. He didn't say anything, just handed the phone back. I blocked both their numbers right there. Didn't respond, didn't explain, just blocked them. Tom asked if I was okay, and I said I'd be fine in a week. That's how long I needed to not hear from them. 6 days into blocking my parents, Gregory called. I almost didn't answer because I figured he was calling on their behalf. But Gregory had always been decent to me, so I picked up. He said the family tension was getting bad and asked if he could help mediate a conversation between me and my parents. I told him I'd think about it. He said that was fair and started to hang up, but I stopped him. Told him any conversation would require my parents to actually understand what they did, not just apologize to make me stop being difficult. Gregory was quiet for a second, then said he'd make sure they knew that. I hung up and sat on the couch staring at nothing. Tom came home from work 2 days later and found me in our bedroom. I had our wedding album open on the bed, the professional photos we'd paid too much for. I was looking at the ceremony pictures, specifically at the 2 empty seats in the front row where my parents should have been. Tom sat down next to me without saying anything at first. Then he put his hand on my shoulder and said he was worried about me, that he supported my boundaries completely, but he wanted to make sure I wasn't letting this consume me. He said he didn't want me sacrificing my own peace just to prove a point. I closed the album and told him I knew. But knowing something and feeling it were different things. I unblocked my parents' numbers on a Wednesday morning. Immediately my phone buzzed with notifications. Missed calls, voicemails, texts from the week I'd had them blocked. I scrolled through the texts first. Most were angry or defensive, but there was one voicemail from Mom that was different. Her voice sounded rough, like she'd been crying. She said Muffin was getting older and having health problems, that they'd been spending so much time at the vet lately, and it made them realize how much time they'd wasted, how much time they'd spent focused on the dog instead of their actual family. Her voice cracked when she said she was sorry. Really sorry. Not sorry I was upset, but sorry for what they did. I played the voicemail 3 times. Each time I wanted to call her back, but I didn't because I needed to know if she actually meant it, or if this was just another thing she was saying to make the problem go away. Layla called me that Friday. Mom's sister, who I hadn't talked to in months. She said she'd finally heard the full story about what happened at my wedding and why I'd been avoiding my parents. Said she confronted them about it last week at a family dinner. I asked what they said, and Layla sighed. Told me they'd been defensive at first, making excuses about Muffin being sick and how I was overreacting. But she didn't let them off easy. She planted seeds about how choices have consequences, and how they couldn't expect me to just get over missing my own wedding. Layla said she thought they were starting to actually think about what they'd done instead of just being mad that I was mad. I thanked her for saying something. She said family was supposed to look out for each other and she should have said something sooner. 2 weeks went by. I went to work, came home, had therapy sessions with Beth, tried not to think about my parents constantly. Then Dad sent a text. Short and simple. Asked if I'd be willing to meet for coffee, just the 2 of us. No pressure about fixing everything. Just a chance to talk. I showed the text to Tom and he said it was my choice. I brought it up in my next session with Beth. She asked if I felt emotionally ready for that conversation. I said I didn't know, but maybe I never would feel ready. She encouraged me to go if I thought I could handle it. So I texted Dad back and said yes. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop halfway between our places. Neutral territory. The coffee shop was busy when I arrived. Dad was already there at a corner table with 2 cups in front of him. He'd ordered for both of us. My usual order that he somehow still remembered. I sat down and we didn't talk for a minute. Just sat there with our coffee getting cold. Then Dad started talking. He said they got so wrapped up in Muffin that they lost perspective on what actually mattered. That the dog became this thing they poured all their energy into, and they didn't notice they were pushing me away. He said missing my wedding was his biggest regret. Not one of his regrets. His biggest one. He looked at me and said he understood if I couldn't forgive them, but he wanted to try to rebuild something if I was willing. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking around his coffee cup. I told Dad it wasn't just the wedding. That's what he needed to understand. It was 3 years of cancellations and disappointments. 3 years of always coming second to a dog. Missing my graduation, my promotion dinner, leaving my birthday party early, and then finally missing my wedding. I said I spent 3 years watching them choose Muffin over me again and again, and the wedding was just the final proof that I would never be their priority. Dad listened without interrupting. Didn't try to defend himself or make excuses. When I finished talking, he had tears in his eyes. He said they failed me as parents, and he knew saying sorry wasn't enough, but he didn't know what else to do. I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the beginning of believing he actually understood what he'd done wrong. We sat there for another hour talking, not fixing everything, but starting. My next therapy session with Beth was hard, really hard. I told her about meeting Dad and how part of me wanted to just forgive them and move on. But another part was still so angry and hurt. Beth asked me directly if I was tired of maintaining my boundary policy. I said yes immediately. Then I started crying because I admitted I was exhausted from it. Exhausted from keeping track of excuses and blocking their numbers and being cold at family events. But I didn't know if stopping meant letting them off the hook, or if I was just keeping myself trapped in anger by continuing. Beth helped me see something important. She said I could stop the revenge while still having boundaries that kept me safe. That those were two different things. I could let go of punishing them without letting them hurt me again. It sounded simple when she said it, but it felt huge. I opened my phone and stared at the blank text message for 10 minutes before typing anything. My hands shook while I wrote out that I was willing to talk with both of them, but they needed to actually listen this time. No getting defensive, no making excuses, just listening to how their choices affected me. I read it over 3 times before hitting send. Mom's response came back in less than a minute saying they would do whatever it takes. We went back and forth picking a day and settled on next Tuesday at Gregory's house since he offered to be there as a neutral person. I put my phone down and felt my stomach twist into knots. The week crawled by. Every day felt longer than the one before it. I went to work and couldn't focus on anything. Came home and picked at dinner while Tom watched me push food around my plate. Monday night arrived and I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Tom was asleep next to me, but I couldn't stop my brain from running through every possible version of tomorrow's conversation. Around 2 in the morning, I started crying. Not loud sobbing, just quiet tears running down my face while I tried not to wake Tom up. He stirred anyway and pulled me close without saying anything at first. I pressed my face against his chest and whispered that I just wished they had chosen me that day. Just once. On the one day that mattered most. Tom ran his hand through my hair and said he knew. He said I couldn't change what happened, but I could decide how to move forward from here. Whatever I decided, he would support me completely. We stayed like that until the sun came up. Gregory's house was in the same neighborhood where I grew up. I parked on the street and sat in my car for 5 minutes, working up the nerve to go inside. Tom squeezed my hand and said we could leave anytime I wanted. I nodded and got out. Mom and Dad were already there, sitting on Gregory's couch looking uncomfortable. Gregory offered coffee, but I shook my head. We all sat down in his living room and nobody spoke for what felt like an hour, but was probably 30 seconds. I started talking before I could lose my nerve. I told them everything about the past 3 years. How every canceled plan made me feel less important. How watching them pour all their energy into Muffin while barely remembering to call me felt like losing my parents slowly. How missing my graduation and my promotion dinner and my birthday built up this wall between us. And then missing my wedding, the biggest day of my life, proved that I would never be their priority. Mom cried through my entire explanation. Dad kept saying he was sorry over and over, but I told him I needed them to understand the depth of what they did before any apology could mean anything. Mom wiped her eyes and said something I wasn't expecting. She admitted they treated Muffin like the child they couldn't have after me. After I was born, they tried for years to have another baby, but it never happened. When they got Muffin 3 years ago, they poured all that leftover parental energy into the dog, instead of keeping their relationship strong with their actual daughter. She said it sounded completely insane when she heard herself say it out loud. She didn't know how to fix what they broke, but she wanted to try. Dad added that they got so wrapped up in taking care of something that needed them constantly, that they forgot. I still needed them too, just in different ways. He said they failed me as parents, and he was ashamed it took this long to see it clearly. I took a deep breath and told them my revenge policy was wrong. I knew that. But it came from this desperate hurt inside me. This need for them to feel what I felt when they chose a dog over the most important day of my life. I wanted them to know what it was like to be the second choice, to be the one who got canceled on, to watch someone you love pick something else over you again and again. Dad looked at me with tears in his eyes and said he understood now. He was ashamed that it took me mirroring their exact behavior for them to finally see how hurtful it was. Mom reached for my hand, but I pulled back. Not ready for that yet. We talked for 3 hours. Gregory mostly stayed quiet and let us work through it. By the end, my parents agreed to set better boundaries with Muffin and make family relationships their priority again. But I was very clear that I needed to see consistent change over time. Not just promises made because we were all emotional right now. Real, sustained effort to be present and follow through. Mom nodded and said they understood. Dad asked if we could try having dinner together soon, just the four of us. I said maybe in a couple weeks after I had time to process everything. Gregory looked relieved that we were at least talking honestly, even if nothing was completely fixed. I left feeling drained and uncertain, but maybe slightly hopeful. 2 weeks went by. My parents texted a few times asking how I was doing. Nothing pushy, just checking in. Then they invited Tom and me to dinner at their house on Saturday night. We showed up at 6 and they were ready. Food already on the table, no last-minute changes. We sat down and started eating. Nobody mentioned Muffin once during the entire meal. It felt weird and careful, like we were all walking on broken glass trying not to cut ourselves. But it was something. A start. I appreciated the effort even though I kept my guard up the whole time. The following week, Lila reached out through Facebook. I hadn't talked to her in maybe 2 years. She said she heard about everything through the family grapevine and wanted to meet up. We got lunch at this cafe downtown, and she told me about her own parents. They went through something similar with addiction, where she had to set really hard boundaries before they finally got help. She said healing family relationships after big betrayals takes time and setbacks and patience. Hearing her talk about it made me feel less alone. Like maybe my situation wasn't completely unique or unfixable. A few days later, Mom called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. She asked if I wanted to go wedding dress shopping with Priscilla since I was in the bridal party. It was the first normal family activity she invited me to in months. I said yes before I could overthink it. We made plans for the following Saturday. After I hung up, I felt nervous but also hopeful. Maybe we could build something new even if we couldn't fix what was broken. The dress shop was busy when we arrived. Priscilla was already there with 2 other bridesmaids. Mom showed up right on time looking nervous. We spent 2 hours watching Priscilla try on different gowns. When she came out in this lace dress that made her look amazing, Mom started tearing up. She turned to me and quietly apologized again for missing my moment. For not being there when I tried on dresses and walked down the aisle and cut the cake. I looked at her and said I was working on forgiving her, but it was going to be a process. She nodded and said she understood that some wounds take time to heal. We stood there in the dress shop surrounded by white gowns, and I felt something shift just slightly. Not forgiveness yet, but maybe the beginning of it. Caleb sent a group text the following week inviting everyone to his place for a barbecue on Saturday afternoon. My parents were on the list. I stared at the message for a solid 10 minutes trying to decide if I wanted to go. Tom found me sitting on the couch still holding my phone and asked what was wrong. I showed him the text and he sat down next to me. He said we didn't have to go if I wasn't ready, but it might be good to see my parents in a casual setting with other people around. I agreed even though my stomach twisted at the thought of spending hours near them. Saturday came and we drove to Caleb's house around 2. Cars already filled the driveway and street. I could hear music and voices coming from the backyard. We walked around the side of the house and found maybe 20 people scattered across the patio and lawn. My parents stood near the grill talking to Caleb. Mom saw me first and her whole face changed. She smiled, but it looked nervous and uncertain. Dad turned and waved. I waved back and Tom squeezed my hand. We grabbed drinks from the cooler and found spots at a picnic table with some of Tom's cousins. For the first hour, my parents kept their distance. They talked to other guests and helped Caleb with the food, but they kept glancing over at me. Around 3:30, Mom walked over and asked if she could sit down. I nodded and she slid onto the bench across from me. She asked how work was going and I gave her basic answers. Dad joined us a few minutes later carrying a plate of burgers. He offered me one and I took it. We ate and made small talk about the weather and Caleb's new deck. It felt stiff and awkward like we were strangers at a networking event. But they stayed. They didn't make excuses about needing to check on anything. They didn't leave early. When Caleb started a game of cornhole, they joined in, and my dad partnered with Tom. I watched them toss beanbags and joke about their terrible aim. Mom sat next to me on the grass, and we didn't talk much, but she stayed there for the whole game. By the time we left around 7, my shoulders didn't feel as tight. Nothing was fixed, but they'd shown up and made an effort, and that felt like something. 3 months passed, and I started noticing patterns. My parents came to Katie's birthday dinner and stayed through dessert. They attended a family cookout at Gregory's house and helped clean up afterward. They showed up to Michaela's baby shower and brought an expensive gift. Each time they followed through without drama or last-minute cancellations. I mentioned it to Beth during a Tuesday afternoon session. She asked how I felt about their consistency, and I said it was good, but also confusing. She tilted her head and asked what was confusing about it. I explained that I kept waiting for them to slip back into old habits, but they hadn't yet. Beth said that was normal after years of disappointment, but she wanted me to consider something else. She asked if part of me was grieving the relationship we could have had if they'd made these changes earlier. I felt tears start and tried to blink them away. She handed me the tissue box and waited. I admitted that watching them show up now made me angry about all the times they didn't. My college graduation, my promotion dinner, my birthday parties, my wedding. Beth nodded and said grief and anger can exist alongside hope and healing. She said I could acknowledge their current effort while still mourning what I lost. That gave me permission to feel both things at once instead of trying to pick one. I left her office feeling lighter, but also sad in a way I couldn't quite explain to Tom when he asked how therapy went. Priscilla called in early September to say her wedding date was set for the first Saturday in November. She asked if I was still okay being a bridesmaid, and I said yes. Then she got quiet and asked if I thought my parents would actually come. I told her they'd been showing up to everything lately, so I believed they would. She sighed with relief and said she didn't want any drama on her day. I promised her there wouldn't be. 2 weeks later, Mom texted asking if I'd confirmed the wedding date because she wanted to make sure they had it right. I sent her the details again. A week after that, Dad called to ask what time the ceremony started. I told him 4 o'clock, and he said they'd be there early. The repeated confirmations annoyed me because it shouldn't be necessary, but I understood why Priscilla felt anxious. The morning of the wedding, I got ready with the other bridesmaids at Priscilla's house. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom saying they were leaving now and would arrive by 3. I showed Priscilla and she smiled. We finished our hair and makeup and drove to the venue. My parents' car was already in the parking lot when we pulled up at 2:30. They stood near the entrance dressed and ready. Mom waved and Dad gave me a thumbs up. The ceremony started right on time and I walked down the aisle with the other bridesmaids. My parents sat in the 3rd row on the bride's side, and I could see them clearly from where I stood at the altar. They stayed through the entire ceremony. During the reception, Dad gave a speech about family and how important it is to show up for the people you love. His voice cracked when he talked about making mistakes and learning from them. I felt tears running down my face and I wasn't sure if they were happy or sad or both. Mom caught my eye from across the room and mouthed sorry. I nodded and looked away because I couldn't handle that moment yet. They stayed until the last dance and helped carry gifts to Priscilla's car. When we said goodbye in the parking lot, Mom hugged me tight and Dad squeezed my shoulder. Driving home that night, Tom asked how I was feeling. I said I didn't know. He said I seemed different lately and asked if I'd noticed. I admitted I felt less angry than I had in months. He said it showed. He said I smiled more and didn't tense up every time my phone rang. I asked if that was good and he laughed and said of course it was good. He said watching me carry around that much anger had worried him. I told him I'd been worried too. He reached over and held my hand while he drove and said he was proud of me for letting go of the revenge policy, even though it had felt justified at the time. I said I wasn't sure I'd fully let go, but I was trying. He said that was enough. When we got home, I pulled out our wedding album and looked at the photos for the first time in months. The empty seats where my parents should have been still hurt, but the pain felt different now. Less sharp, and more like an old bruise that was finally healing. Katie hosted Thanksgiving at her house and invited the whole family. I volunteered to bring mashed potatoes and Tom made his famous green bean casserole. We arrived around noon and found the house already full of people. My parents were in the kitchen helping Katie set up the buffet. Mom smiled when she saw me and asked if I needed help carrying anything in. I handed her the potatoes and she carried them to the counter. We all gathered around the long table Katie had set up in the dining room. Someone asked about Muffin and my parents glanced at each other. Mom said she was doing well and getting older but still happy. Dad added that they'd hired a dog sitter for the day so they could be here with family. Then they shifted the conversation to ask about Caleb's new job. I watched them redirect away from dog talk and toward family news. It felt deliberate and genuine. During dinner, my parents asked Tom about his work and listened when he explained a new project. They asked me about plans for the holidays and whether we'd thought about visiting Tom's family. Normal conversation, normal attention. After we ate, my parents helped clean up and stayed through dessert. When we left that evening, Dad hugged me goodbye and said he was grateful we could all be together. Beth asked during our next session if I was ready to fully forgive my parents. I sat there thinking about her question for a long time. She didn't rush me. Finally, I said I was somewhere in between. I explained that I could see their effort, and I believed they were trying to change. But the hurt from my wedding day still showed up sometimes when I wasn't expecting it. I'd see a photo or hear a song and feel that same gut punch of being abandoned. Beth said that was completely normal and okay. She said forgiveness wasn't a switch I could flip. It was a process that took time and might never be complete. She said I could accept what happened and move forward with my parents while still carrying some hurt about the past. That felt like permission to be complicated and messy instead of having everything figured out. Mid-December, my parents called and invited us to their house for Christmas. Mom said it would be small and low-key, just the 4 of us. I looked at Tom and he nodded. I told her we'd come. She sounded surprised and happy, and said she'd make my favorite dessert. Christmas morning, we opened presents at our apartment, then drove to my parents' house around noon. They answered the door together and welcomed us inside. The house smelled like ham and cinnamon. We ate lunch and exchanged gifts. My parents gave Tom a nice watch and me a gift card to my favorite bookstore. We gave them a framed photo of all of us from Priscilla's wedding. Mom cried when she opened it and said thank you. The afternoon felt careful and a little awkward in places. We didn't talk about the past or the wedding or anything heavy. We just existed together in the same space and it was okay. Not perfect, but okay. When we left that evening, I felt something warm in my chest that I hadn't felt around my parents in years. Mom handed me one more gift as we were putting on our coats to leave. She said she'd made something for me and hoped I'd like it. I opened the box and found a photo album. The cover said, "Our daughter's wedding" in silver letters. I opened it and saw professional photos from my wedding day. Every major moment was there. The ceremony, the reception, the cake cutting, the first dance, me with my bridesmaids, Tom with his groomsmen. My parents weren't in any of the photos because they weren't there, but she'd collected them all anyway. I flipped to the first page and saw an inscription in Mom's handwriting. It said she couldn't be in these photos, but she wanted to honor the day she should have been there for. She said she was sorry and she loved me, and she hoped someday I could forgive her. I stood there in their entryway holding the album and crying. Mom hugged me and I let her. Dad stood nearby with tears in his eyes. Tom put his arm around me and we stayed like that for a few minutes. Then we said goodbye and drove home. I kept the album on my lap the whole way and couldn't stop looking at it. January arrived cold and gray. Mom called one afternoon and asked if I wanted to have lunch. Just the two of us. I said yes before I could overthink it. We met at a cafe downtown on a Thursday. She ordered soup and I got a sandwich. We talked about safe topics at first. The weather, work, plans for the new year. Then Mom said she wanted to be honest about something. She said she was trying really hard to rebuild trust between us, but she didn't know if she was doing it right. She said she still felt guilty about the wedding every single day. I told her I could see her effort and I appreciated it. I said I was trying too, but it was hard. She nodded and said she understood. She said she couldn't change the past, but she wanted to be present for my future, whatever that looked like. We sat there drinking coffee, and it felt like the most honest conversation we'd had in years. When we left, she hugged me and said she loved me. I said I loved her too, and meant it. Tom and I started looking at houses in February. We'd been saving for a down payment and finally had enough to start seriously searching. We found a place we loved after 3 weeks of looking. 3 bedrooms, nice yard, good neighborhood. We put in an offer and it got accepted. I called my parents to tell them the news and they sounded excited. Dad asked when we were closing and I told him late March. 2 days later, Mom called and said they wanted to help with the down payment. She said they knew it wouldn't fix anything, but they wanted to contribute something meaningful to our future. I told her I needed to think about it. I talked to Beth in our next session and she asked why I was hesitant. I said I didn't want them using money as leverage or holding it over me later. Beth said that was a valid concern, but I could accept their help with clear boundaries. She suggested I tell them it had to be a gift with no strings attached. I called my parents back and explained my terms. They agreed immediately and said they just wanted to help. We closed on the house in March and my parents' check covered half the down payment. When I signed the papers, I felt grateful and nervous and hopeful all at once. Moving day arrived with perfect spring weather, and my parents' car pulled up right at 8 in the morning like they promised. Mom got out carrying a box of sandwiches and drinks while Dad unloaded cleaning supplies from their trunk. They walked into our new house and immediately started working without waiting to be told what needed doing. Dad found the toolbox and began hanging pictures in the living room, measuring twice before putting any holes in the walls. Mom unpacked kitchen boxes and organized our cabinets with a system that actually made sense, putting everyday dishes within easy reach and fancy stuff up high. Tom and I carried furniture upstairs while my parents handled the ground floor, and every time I came down expecting them to be checking their phones or making excuses to leave, they were still working. We broke for lunch around noon and ate sandwiches sitting on moving boxes in the dining room. Nobody mentioned muffin once during the entire meal. Dad asked about our plans for the backyard and offered to help build raised garden beds in a few weeks. Mom wanted to know what colors we were thinking for the guest room and said she'd love to help paint if we needed extra hands. They stayed until 6 that evening, working alongside us without a single complaint about being tired or needing to get home. When they finally left, Dad hugged me tight and said he was proud of us for this big step, and Mom kissed my cheek saying she couldn't wait to come back for dinner once we were settled. 6 months passed and my parents kept showing up to things. They came to Tom's birthday dinner at a restaurant downtown and stayed through dessert and coffee. They attended a cookout at Caleb's house and brought potato salad, sitting with family for hours without checking the time. When Katie hosted a baby shower for her daughter, my parents arrived on time with a thoughtful gift and didn't leave early. They invited us to dinner at their house twice a month and actually served meals at reasonable hours instead of rushing through everything. Muffin still existed in their lives, but she wasn't the center of their universe anymore. They mentioned her occasionally when she did something funny, or when they took her to the vet for checkups, but the conversations didn't spiral into 30-minute detailed accounts of her daily activities. Mom started texting me about normal things like recipes she wanted to try, or asking my opinion on decorating ideas. Dad called sometimes just to chat about sports or ask how work was going. They remembered Tom's work presentations and asked how they went. They showed interest in our house projects and offered help without being pushy. The change felt real and lasting instead of temporary effort meant to appease me. Michaela came over one Saturday afternoon while Tom was at a work thing, and we sat on our back porch drinking iced tea. She studied me for a minute, then said, I looked different somehow. Lighter, maybe. Like I wasn't carrying around a heavy weight anymore. I realized she was right, and told her I felt genuinely happy instead of just going through motions and pretending everything was fine. She asked about my parents, and I explained they'd been consistently showing up and following through for months now. Michaela said she could tell the difference in me, that I smiled more easily and didn't have that tight tension in my shoulders that used to be there all the time. I admitted I'd stopped carrying constant anger around with me like a shield. The wedding still hurt when I thought about it, and I'd never forget walking down that aisle without my parents there. But I was building something new with them based on who they were choosing to be now. They couldn't change the past or give me back those years when Muffin mattered more than I did, but they were trying hard to be better in the present. Michaela reached over and squeezed my hand, saying she was glad I was finding peace even if it looked different from I'd imagined. Looking back over the past 18 months, I could see the whole journey clearly now. My revenge policy hadn't healed anything or made me feel better, but it forced a reckoning that needed to happen. Making my parents feel what I felt when they chose Muffin over me pushed them to finally understand the hurt they'd caused. We'd never get back the years they spent obsessed with their dog or the moments they missed because of her. My wedding day would always have that empty space where they should have been standing, and no amount of apologies or changed behavior could fill that hole. But we were moving forward with honest communication and boundaries that protected everyone involved. Some weeks were better than others, and the progress wasn't perfectly linear. Sometimes I still felt a flash of hurt when I looked at my wedding photos and saw those empty seats. Sometimes I wondered if I could really trust that this change would last, or if they'd slip back into old patterns. But I was learning that healing wasn't about perfect resolution or erasing the past. It was about choosing to keep trying even when things got complicated, about accepting that relationships could be messy and imperfect, but still worth maintaining. My parents and I would never have the relationship we might have had if they'd made different choices, but we had a chance at building something real going forward, and I was finally ready to take it.